Speaking of on fire, something that would definitely set off a smoke detector is the heat of this West Bloomfield Lakers football team. West Bloomfield last week, Friday, an exciting matchup on homecoming night against Southfield A&T, where they emerged victorious 44-0, the final score at the Swamp at West Bloomfield High School. Their second shutout of the season, both of those coming at home, and plenty more to look into and celebrate from this football game. Joining us for more analysis now is color commentator for our live coverage of Laker football, Matt Catoni. Matt, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was an impressive game for the Lakers, a bounce-back game that they really needed after two tough losses on the road at Birmingham Groves and Rochester Adams, respectively. They come back in. They needed to show that they were able to execute in all three phases and play a complete game. They definitely did both of those on Friday night.
Yeah, going into the game, we had kind of said they didn't just need to win, but win convincingly if they wanted to show that they were still among the top in their division and, contenders for a state title when playoffs come around. They did just that. And I was really, intrigued with how the passing game came to develop a little bit. That was arguably my favorite play of the game, the connection that Elijah Durham and Bo Jackson were able to come together with. I believe it was an 80-yard touchdown. But it was nice to see that chemistry develop a little bit in the passing game and kind of, show signs of life that, come later in the playoffs, they may be able to throw the ball if they have to.
Yeah, this Lakers offense continued to be its strong point in that game against Southfield A&T. As you said, the passing game definitely getting involved much more than it was in previous games. And it was Bo Jackson's most efficient game so far. 5 for 8 passing, 117 yards, and a touchdown. He also took it for a run on the ground, a 29-yard run late in the first half that set them up for a potential score at the end of the half. A really impressive play for Bo Jackson, who had 146 all-purpose yards. Saw other players like Devin James on your screen as we speak getting in the end zone. And, of course, here you see that 80-yard reception for a touchdown to Elijah Durham early on in the game, late in the first half, to put the Lakers up by 30 at that point. A really impressive matchup offensively for them, but also on the ground game, too, where we saw Josh Tate have another great matchup, over 5 yards per carry, and guys down the depth chart like Obi Duru and Malcolm Gibson also coming into the fold.
Yeah, we saw Gibson really get his first action of the season, and that was very nice to see, not just, him get some action given the score of the game, but the ability that he showed once he got into the game, and he definitely flashed as a runner. It'll be interesting to see if they feature him more going forward. But this win was just especially crucial given what else happened around the OAA this week. Lake Orion losing, kind of giving West Bloomfield an option or opportunity to get back into the thick of things if they're able to rattle off some wins here in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's a huge point right there, too. Lake Orion having taken a loss, Clarkston having taken a loss to Rochester Adams. Now West Bloomfield will have a chance with them this week. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. But look, Rochester Adams picks up a loss. West Bloomfield's able to get a couple more wins over these next 3 weeks with a tough round going forward with Clarkston, Lake Orion, and Oxford in that order. Now all of a sudden they've gone from falling out of the OAA red race to potentially being a contender in that race going forward. But back to Friday night's 44-0 victory for West Bloomfield. What I thought was the most impressive was their defensive performance, which seemed like they had a head of steam in that game. They were extra motivated after a couple of matchups where their opponents put up quite a lot of points against them.
Yeah, they really did not let much going at all on defense this week, and that was very nice to see. They stifled the run game, and even when they did allow Southfield A&T to get into, field goal range even, we saw them almost immediately snatch the ball right back. I believe it was Merriweather with the first pick and then Chops Pittman with his second pick six of the year. But it was a very impressive and detailed performance by the defense.
Yeah, Jeremiah Benson with 1.5 sacks on that game, assisted on that second sack by Josh Bryant. They're both the leading sackers on this team in 2024, with Benson now 5.5 sacks on the season, and Josh Bryant with 1.5. But as you said, we saw multiple interceptions in that game. Khalik Robinson coming up with one. We had the pick six from Chops Pittman. That's his second interception of the season, both of which have ended up in the end zone. But even guys down the depth chart making some very impressive performances too. And some of the common guys we haven't seen in that starring role really this season being highly effective. Will Espy with 8 tackles, 5 of which were solo tackles as well. And then on the special teams front, they had an excellent night too. And part of that was just mistakes from a young Southfield A&T team. But these Lakers took advantage of those mistakes and made the most out of them, and it showed on the scoreboard.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the special teams last week were phenomenal. And I think that is something, that's kind of helped them throughout the year. They've kind of been the most consistent unit on this entire team. We saw a few weeks ago at Rochester Adams, the special teams unit, kind of kickstart that second half for them. And this week, too, we see them recover the, bobbled kick. I don't know if that was an intentional onside attempt or, just something to keep the ball away from the returners. But we've seen the special teams unit, really be, kind of the leaders of this team in a way.
Yeah, been highly effective in the past few weeks, limiting those opportunities or creating tougher opportunities for their opponents. You think about the Rochester Adams game, which was tied at a 0-0 score through the half. A lot of that came down to putting them in inopportune field position to start off those offensive series. That's a credit to Jaden Allos and his punting ability, and to the upmen and making effective tackles when those punts were ultimately being returned. So special teams plays a really critical role, and we have to also talk about the effectiveness of a guy like Justin Ward, who had his first field goal of the season last week, who up until last week's game where he had 1 missed extra point, other than that, has been perfect on the season every time he's stepped foot on the field. That's going to be a huge factor, especially with a tough OAA schedule coming up in the Rad over these next 3 weeks. And that includes this week going on the road, one of the toughest environments in the entire state, heading to Northern Oakland County against Clarkston.
Yeah, and really that was another key part of showing some, life on defense this week with being able to stop the run, because, this week against Clarkston and a few weeks against Oxford, they're going to want to run the ball. So it's going to be crucial to see that defense, step up again this week. We've mentioned the 24-hour rule for getting, after Friday night what happens. But again, you're going to want to see, similar instances from that defense with stepping up and stopping the run.
And that's going to come into factor this week. We saw a year ago in Clarkston, very similar story for the Lakers, struggling a little bit on the defensive side because of the playmaking ability of those Clarkston Wolves with Griffin Bowman and Brady Collins, their then quarterback, at the helm. Now it's a different situation. They got 24 returning starters from last season's team, where they were very good throughout the season, made the playoffs. They had some tough games, and their schedule didn't quite work out so favorably for them in 2023. But Alec Wazenko, their quarterback, has made a really strong connection with Brady Beck, and this team is playing smart football and have gone up against tough competition. That's something that's going to really benefit Clarkston coming into this game, because they've had matchups with Belleville, matchups with Rochester Adams that have really prepared them for what West Bloomfield's got to offer.
Yeah, really, again, we've mentioned that's arguably the biggest benefit of playing in this division. Not just usually the teams that you play in your own division, but normally teams in this division choose like good out-of-conference matchups. We've seen both of these teams have played both state title participants from last year. Belleville is obviously in a much better state than Southfield A&T is, but both of these teams are well-tested, battle-tested at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see, how they've licked their wounds, addressed their weaknesses, and how they come into this crucial matchup in OAA division play.
Yeah, especially after the week that they had, losing 10-28 to Rochester Adams. We saw how that kind of lit a fire under the West Bloomfield Lakers, losing a close matchup to Rochester Adams. For Clarkston, a little bit of a different story. It was a game that wasn't really close for them in the final score, and they're going to come in motivated. They're coming in at home, and they're coming in with a rivalry game against a team in West Bloomfield that's always up in that competition for who's getting the hype year after year out of the OAA Red, with West Bloomfield coming in the preseason #1. This week, the D-Zone ranks West Bloomfield 24th in the state and Clarkston number 22 in the state. So this is going to be a really interesting matchup Matt Catoni is with us, our color commentator, for our live coverage of West Bloomfield Laker football. We'll do our best again to have live coverage of this week's game from Clarkston High School. It's a Friday night kickoff at 7 o'clock. The Lakers taking on the Clarkston Wolves. Matt, always good to see a bounce-back game after a couple of losses. We saw a lot of good things from the Lakers last week. What are you looking to see continue to improve or really be focal points for West Bloomfield as they come into arguably their toughest game of the year so far?
Yeah, being efficient on offense, not making mistakes, holding on to the ball. We saw last week, them come out and kind of just do these simple, easy throws for Bo Jackson, roll them out, have him kind of dump it off to a guy in the flats that's already in motion. Just simple, easy throws to get the offense moving and just limiting those opportunities for the defense to force turnovers. I think if they hold on to the ball this week, it'll really put them in good position to just, chew the clock out and force Clarkson to make the mistakes that we saw Southfield A&T make last week.
It's going to be an interesting week for the West Bloomfield Lakers coming in to Clarkston on Friday night, a big rivalry game and a game that's going to, look, last week was a bounce-back game. It was an identity game. This is going to be a game that sets the tone for the weeks ahead with Lake Orion coming in, another rivalry week at West Bloomfield on October 4th, and then Oxford, who's been a very tough team to compete with in 2024 and is one of those teams similar to in the past what Southfield A&T had been in the years leading up to their championship, a team that looks like it's a matter of when, not if, they take that big step forward and become a contender in the state of Michigan. Matt, any lasting thoughts before we let you go?
Yeah, I mean, really just this game being on the road and the next two at home just makes it all the more crucial. If the Lakers are able to rattle off a win this week on the road, those next two home games just become that much more cozy.
It's going to be an interesting week for West Bloomfield. It will tell us a lot about the very, very compelling story we have in the OAA Red Division going forward this second part of the regular season. Matt, thank you so much.
Yep, thank you for having me.